Hey everybody, welcome back to the next part in my Creating a Quick Great Tone series, where I take topics I talked about in previous videos and try to condense them down into a much smaller, shorter package so you can kind of get the gist of it right away and hopefully spark some new ideas in using your Helix. Today, we are talking about one of the features in the Helix that I think makes it extremely flexible and gives us the ability to be very creative with our tones while opening the doors for almost endless routing possibilities, and that's the use of split and merge paths. So without further ado, let's go over to HXEdit and take a look and see what we can do. So first things first, what is a split and merge block? First of all, what happens in the Helix is if we add a block, let's say we added a delay here and we added another of the same delay, I can then grab one of these and pull it down to a parallel path and move these around, add other blocks to each path, make this path longer so I can fit more blocks in there, and very flexible on how I can work with this. And this gives us the ability to run our blocks in series or in parallel. Now you'll see up here on the top path, I've created a little preset just to give you an example. But first thing we need to do is talk about what exactly are the possibilities with our split and merge blocks. So if I click here after I've created this scenario where I've pulled a block down lower and click on the split portion, it gives us four options: split Y, split AB, split crossover, and split dynamic. Then over here after that, we have our merge block, which gives us the ability to control the level of path A, the level of path B. So if we want one path louder or softer, we can do that here. We can also pan them if we're dealing with a stereo preset. So I could pan it after all the processing has been done. I could pan the A path all the way left or all the way right, and likewise with the B path. I can also choose to have normal or inverted polarity on the B path, and I can also adjust the overall level. We're going to be talking more about what's going on over here on the split path. So starting with split Y. Split Y is basically going to take everything that's happening in path A before the split block and send it in equal volume to continue along path A, but to also send that along a second path so we can process it separately. We can also from here use the pan controls to balance pre-effects, let's say, right? So we could send the right side of all of the processing before the split path only to path A, or we could send the left side only to path B and the right side to path A. So that's going to open up a lot of possibilities well beyond the scope of what this video is about. But coming back to this now, the split AB is going to give us the ability to do the same thing, send this pre-split path signal, having some of it go to path A and some of it go to path B. But with this, the split AB, we can actually kind of use more of a dimmer switch to control how much signal is getting sent to path A. So here with A100, no signal is going to be sent down to path B. It's all going to go to path A. Here, it's all going to go to path B and nothing through into path A. So we can then use that to kind of blend. Maybe we want more of what's on path A, so we kind of lean a little bit more towards that, or vice versa. So very useful block. The split crossover is going to allow us to send all the frequencies above a certain frequency point that we set down here through path A, and all the frequencies below that to path B. Or we could reverse that so that all the frequencies below are going to the path A top path, and all the frequencies above are going to the bottom path, or path B. I used this kind of famously in one video for using two gain blocks to kind of create a makeshift shelf EQ, which we didn't have at the time in the Helix. I no longer use that. We now have a shelf EQ. But some really interesting uses of this, if we wanted to only maybe have our lower notes below a certain frequency be compressed, let's say. We could throw a compressor down here and say, only send all the frequencies below 500 hertz to the compressor so that we weren't compressing our high notes, or vice versa. So very useful feature as well. And then the split dynamic block is one of the newer split blocks that have been added to the Helix. So this gives us the ability to send to path B only audio information that passes a certain audio threshold. So you might say, well, what could we use that for? I'll give an example of this a little bit later in this video, but I could maybe set a delay down here and have it so that when I'm playing very softly, it doesn't trigger the delay. And when I play a little bit louder, it does. And I'll give you an example of that. There's probably a million creative uses we could come up with for these, again, beyond the scope of this video, but at least once we understand what these particular settings do, it can at least give us the ability to use our imagination and come up with some really creative possibilities in our tone creation. So let's just come back to split Y for a moment here. And some folks might say, what could we use this for? One myth that I want to make sure I kind of talk about again, and I did a very in-depth video about this, there was a bit of a rumor or misinformation going around that if you simply grab something like, let's say, a single reverb and pull it down to the parallel path, that somehow that made the reverb sound better. And it really doesn't. I debunked that using a null test within the Helix to show that that's really no different than just coming up to our reverb and blending it with the mix control on the parallel path. That's not to say that we would never move effects down there, but just a simple idea of moving a reverb down to the parallel path does not somehow make it any better. It's nothing we can't do just leaving it on the series path. But in this example, I have a little preset I set up. I'm using the Voltage Queen amp. Going right now, I've shut these delays off, but this is just going through a reverb, and it sounds something like this. So what I've done is I've set up two snapshots here. I've set up a series snapshot, which shows this amp now being fed with a split Y into a path with a delay, a transistor tape, into a Hall reverb. Now I've bumped up, as you probably heard in the little audio example I just gave, I've bumped the reverb up fairly loud, and I've bumped the delays up to a mix of 100. And I also have another delay down here that's turned off in the series snapshot, but it has the identical settings to the delay up top. And then when I go to parallel, it shuts off the transistor delay up top on path A and puts it in parallel. Now you might say, well, why would you do this? Well, this is one of the quick uses and probably most common uses we would have for using something like a split Y. Some folks like to have their delay in series before their reverb. What that's going to mean is when I play and my delay creates my echoes or my repeats, they are going to be processed by the reverb. Now that's going to mean that not only the initial hit that I do on my note is going to be reverberated, but now also all of the echoes afterwards. Now there is no right and wrong answer here. Some folks really like that sound. Others like their delay repeats to maybe stand out a little bit more and be dry and unaffected. So they prefer to have the delay not be processed by the reverb. Well, that's very simple. If we run it in parallel, and this would be one of the really good reasons to run effects in parallel, we now will have the signal from the Voltage Queen amp coming down here, splitting off, hitting the transistor tape set at these settings, just like I had it up here, and then returning to the path after the reverb. So the amp is going to be processed by the reverb. It's also going to be processed by the delay, but the delay will be merged back in after the reverb, so it will not have its echoes reverberated. And I hope that makes sense. So what does that sound like? Like I said, I have very extreme settings here. I'm just going to go to series, and I'm going to hit a couple notes and let those repeat. And I want you to listen for how wet the repeats are. You hear how every repeat has reverb on them. When I go to parallel now, you'll hear that that is not the case. The initial note does because it's coming from the amp going through the reverb, but the delay echoes do not. Back to series. You'll hear how the echoes have a lot of reverb on them. And in parallel, they do not. They're completely dry because they're coming in after the reverb. So that's one use of what we could use a split path for. Now, what about this split dynamic one? I don't have the time in this video to go through all these possibilities with everything, but the split dynamic is new and something I don't think I've ever covered. But let's stay here now, and you'll see if I maybe bring this to a setting of -17, which is going to determine when it sends signal down to the split path. As I was mentioning, what's going to happen here now is and let me just come to the delay and maybe bring it back to a more reasonable mix. When I hit a certain volume threshold in my notes, it's going to trigger the delay because it's going to only send notes above a certain volume threshold down to the second path. So anything that doesn't reach that threshold will just continue along the top path. And let me bring my reverb down a little bit as well. So what you'll notice here is if I play softly below this threshold I've set, now, if you notice, delay came in after. So if I hit a note, no delay. But if I hit those notes louder, you'll notice there I hit a threshold where the delayed repeat started coming in. So with careful use of the threshold and the attack and decay controls, we can fine tune that to a point where we can get used to being able to trigger any sort of effect. I use delay in this case, but maybe we put some other type of effect that when we surpass a certain threshold, it's going to be able to trigger that effect for us. So some really interesting possibilities there. So that's really all the time I have in this video to keep it sort of a quick great tone. I do have a more in-depth video with some other ideas from a long time ago. I will put a link to that below. I will also put a link to the video where I talked about the fact that the reverb being pulled to a parallel path is not really doing anything magical, but it can be put down there for other purposes and other reasons. So I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I hope that at least sparked some ideas, some creative possibilities for you to add to your Helix presets. Maybe those are things you weren't aware of. And I mean, there's a lot of folks who are very well aware of this, and they haven't learned anything from this, and that's fine too. But there are a lot of folks that don't know this even exists in the Helix, and it really is a wonderful creative tool and gives us a lot of possibilities within our presets. So I hope I covered everything, and I hope that was very helpful. Please like the video, share it with anybody who you think would get some use out of watching it. Also, please subscribe to my channel, hit the little bell notification to get notified when I put new content out, and I'll be back really soon with some more. Thank you guys again so much for tuning in and sharing your time with me. Ciao for now.